Howdy again everyone, and last week was exciting for me as I got to test out the new Fujifilm XF 16-55mm f2.8 RLMWR Mark II lens, which is exclusively for their X-mount mirrorless cameras. It fills the shoes of their original 16-55 f2.8, being much smaller and lighter than that rather monstrous old thing, and its price is $1,200 or £1,150 here in the UK, so it's not cheap, but it's supposed to be their flagship zoom lens, and standard zooms with bright apertures are some of the most difficult for manufacturers to produce, so it's the kind of price you would expect here. I'd like to thank Fujifilm UK for loaning me this lens and an X-T5 camera for a couple of weeks for testing, although as usual this is a totally independent review. 16-55mm is the full frame equivalent of 24-83mm, which is a fantastic zoom range for an f2.8 optic. This could prove to be one of the most useful lenses on the X system, giving you a nice zoom range and noticeably faster shutter speeds and more out of focus backgrounds than a lens with a slower aperture. This could potentially be a very good lens for wedding photography, photojournalism, well, just about anything really. I love the lens's build quality here, not least because it's so much smaller and lighter than the original, weighing only 410 grams, under a pound. The lens's body is made of a mixture of metal and very high quality smooth plastic, and the rear lens mount has a gasket around it for extra weather sealing. At the rear, we get the lens's aperture ring. It turns with nice gentle clicks at every third of an f-stop, and it can be locked in or out of A mode. And with a switch on the side, it can be set to turn smoothly for video work, a further nice little improvement over the original optic. Then comes the lens's rubberized zoom ring. I was much less impressed with that, as it's surprisingly sticky to turn. You can completely forget about getting nice smooth zoom actions if you're using this lens for video work, except at the widest angles. The lens's focus ring feels like it's made of metal and turns very smoothly. Here you can see that the lens doesn't really suffer from focus breathing, which is a big bonus for video makers. If you do long focus pulls quickly though, you will notice a little jerkiness, something that I've found on just about all Fujifilm lenses on all Fujifilm cameras I've used, in video mode or in photo mode, but you only really notice it when doing big sudden focus pulls, not when doing precise adjustments. The lens's autofocus system is excellent, as you can see here. It's very quick, quiet, and works very accurately too, which befits a major camera system's flagship lens. Something missing from the lens though is image stabilization, so you should definitely bear that in mind if you're shooting with a camera that does not feature its own in-body stabilization. The lens's filter thread size is 72mm wide, and it comes with a petal-shaped plastic hood. Overall, absolutely fantastic build quality here in pretty much every way, and some good features for video makers as well, although I do wish that zoom ring turned more smoothly. Anyway, image quality, and Fujifilm were quite brave to loan me an X-T5 camera with this lens, as its 40 megapixel aps-c sensor is just about the most demanding on the market today. Well, let's see what the lens can do. At 16mm and f2.8, we see very good sharpness and contrast in the middle of the image. Stop down to f4 and that image quality becomes perfect. Anyway, let's open back up to f2.8 and look over in the corners where unfortunately we see softness. f4 is an improvement and f5.6 looks fairly sharp now. f8 looks the same. If you stop down further than that, you'll just get softness from diffraction. Let's zoom in about halfway to 32mm. At f2.8, again, sharpness and contrast are very good in the middle, and just a touch better if you stop down to f4. Let's open back up to f2.8 and look over into the corners. That's more like it. At f2.8, those corners are not bad. Stop down to f4 and they're basically as sharp as the middle, which is impressive, and that's as sharp as the image quality gets here at 32mm. Finally, let's zoom all the way into 55mm. Again, we see great image quality in the middle at f2.8, but that's as sharp as the middle gets. Let's look into the corners. Again, we see softness at f2.8, although I was expecting a bit worse. f4 looks about the same, but at f5.6 we see a nice improvement, and the lens stays this sharp at f8. Stop down to f11 or further, and diffraction really takes its toll and softens the image. Overall, the tested lens fell just a little short of the very high expectations I had for it, due to some corner softness at the brightest apertures at the extreme ends of its zoom range. But at the same time, you have to be realistic about these things. A fast standard zoom lens is one of the most challenging optics for manufacturers to design, so getting it razor sharp from corner to corner at f2.8 on a 40 megapixel camera would have been nothing short of miraculous. All things considered, this is actually a good performance. Alright, let's bypass in-camera corrections by shooting in RAW and processing with third-party software and take a look at distortion and vignetting. At 16mm, unsurprisingly, barrel distortion and vignetting are both very strong. Stop down to f4 or f5.6 and those corners get a lot brighter. Zoom into 20mm and that distortion straightens out. Zoom in further, especially to 55mm, and we see heavy pincushion distortion now, and again dark corners at f2.8. Again, stop down to f4 or f5.6 to see those corners brighten up. So if you're shooting in RAW, then you will definitely need to correct your images here. A nice little strength of this lens is that when you zoom in, its minimum focus distance is 30 centimeters for getting you very close to your subject. At f2.8, close-up image quality is soft and contrast is low, but the good news is that you only need to stop down to f4 to get fantastic image quality back again. Let's see how the lens works against bright lights now. Its performance is a little below average here. We see a fair bit of flaring when shooting at wider angles, including a big flaring circle around the point of light. Zoom in and that flaring is slightly reduced, only to be replaced by poor contrast though. While we're working in the dark, let's take a look for coma and sun stars. The good news to start with is that the lens presents virtually no coma smearing here at all, even at f2.8. Okay, well, let's zoom out again and look for sun stars. They begin to properly emerge at f8, but only become well defined at about f11. At f16 and f22 they look huge though. Next, bokeh. At f2.8 the lens can get you some nicely but not super deeply out of focus backgrounds here, especially if you zoom in, of course, and they look perfectly fine. Couldn't really identify any serious problems in my test shots here. Those backgrounds all look pretty smooth to me. Finally, related to bokeh comes longitudinal chromatic aberration. It's there at f2.8 but not too strong. At f4 it's still somewhat visible, but at f5.6 it's basically gone. Overall, while it's not a perfect lens, I really enjoyed shooting with the Fujifilm 16-55mm Mark II, and it's a good improvement over the original. Good sharpness, nice bokeh, a great zoom range, and a close minimum focus distance all make this thing very versatile. In terms of image quality, I was hoping for a touch more corner sharpness at the brightest apertures. Even so, it's still probably the best fast standard zoom lens on the system. And in all fairness, you've got to be realistic about these things. When faced with a 40 megapixel sensor, a zoom lens will never be quite as sharp as a prime, and we have been a bit spoiled by Fujifilm's latest prime lenses. So if it's a zoom lens you need, and you can afford the best available, then this is the one to go for, of course, and I recommend it. But if you're desperate for the very sharpest image quality out of your 40 megapixel Fujifilm camera, then stick with their prime lenses. I love testing new Fujifilm lenses, aps-c or medium format. Even though I'm normally a Canon shooter, I can never quite get enough of that tactile Fujifilm X mount system. Thanks for watching everyone, and if you find these reviews helpful, then do check out my Patreon page where supporters get all kinds of exclusive bonus content and early access to reviews and special videos. Ciao for now, everyone.